So the next story I'm going to tell you is not historically accurate, though it is true in the way that stories are always true, even if they never happen. But it is a story of Finn MacCumhail. Have any of you heard of Finn MacCumhail before? Yeah. He is a legendary Irish hero, and he is the leader of a famous war band, the Fianna. And this story begins on a day when, like so many days, Finn and his Fianna were getting ready to go to battle. They had broken down their camp. The morning was well advanced. They were all ready to go, when unexpectedly one of them came back. And Finn looked at him and he said, Cael, for this was the warrior's name, he was not the vegetable. But, Cael, where have you been? Why did you leave camp? And Cael said, well, I went to go see the woman who raised me. Okay, said Finn, so why did you go see the woman who raised you? And he said, because I had a dream. I dreamt of marriage. I dreamt of a beautiful woman of the She, and She are the fairy folk, the fair folk who live throughout the Ireland and Scotland. I dreamt of Creadhe. Creadhe? Said Finn. Creadhe. Creadhe, you know that she is the sneakiest woman in all of Ireland. There is not one beautiful thing left that she hasn't somehow managed to get her hands on and tuck away in that house of hers under the hill. You want to marry Creadhe? Do you know what she demands of everyone who would come and try to marry her? She makes everyone who comes sing her a song about how wonderful everything in her house is. And they have to be accurate, or there's trouble. I know, said Cael, but the woman who raised me told me what I need to do. Well, Finn could see that Cael was set on this. So all of the Fianna together decided to put off going to war, and instead they went to go find the home of Creadhe. And they went over the hills and passed around through the valleys until finally they came to her house under the hill. And Finn approached the door and he knocked with the hilt of his gold-tipped spear. And the door opened. And 50 serving girls walked out, and behind them came Creadhe. And she said, Finn, why have you come to my home? And he said, someone is here who wants to marry you. Cael, do you know of Cael, the mighty warrior? And she said, I've heard of him, but I've never put eyes on him. Does he have a song for me? I do, said Cael. And he stepped forward and he began to sing. And he wasn't maybe the first who had named the things that she had in her home, but the way he sang of them as if he knew, because he knew the wonder that they held, that he could feel. He sang so that you could feel Creadhe's own love for these things that she had gathered, that she had created. He saw her world as she did, and her heart melted, and they were married. They spent a time together, but even though they had married, Cael was still one of the Fianna. And so the day came that he left. And Creadhe waited for him to return. And she waited and she waited until that day. The wind came moaning from the sea, carrying tidings of a battle between the Fianna and the armies of the king of the world. The wind moaned, the ragged hills and the stones ached for the deeds of the warriors. The crows in the air, the witches in the valleys, the wolves in the woods, all howled at the battle. Creadhe's heart grew cold as she set out to find her beloved. And she walked until she came to a great marsh. And there she saw a heron, a mother heron, with 2 chicks. And before them crouched a fox. And the heron would put one wing out to protect its child, and the fox would dart at the other. And she would stretch that way, and the fox would dive at the first. And Creadhe watched, and she knew the fear that heron felt for the one she loved, and she hurried on to find Cael. She went on and on until she came to the hills above the sea, and she heard a stag, and it bellowed in grief. For the doe it loved lay still and dead in the valley, slain by a hunter. And she feared that she would know the grief that the stag felt. And she ran down to the shore, and she came to the water. And the shore was strewn with the fallen heroes. And as she watched, the waves brought Cael's form to her, still and cold. She fell to her knees beside him, and she sang a song. She sang a song of grief. She sang of the heron whose chicks were devoured by the fox. She sang of the deer in the hills, of their unending grief. She sang of the sorrow of the waves that had brought her beloved to her. She sang of herself, who would never again find joy in the world. And so she lay down beside Cael and lay her head on his shoulder, and she left the world behind. And so it is that Cael and Creadhe left the world, but their songs remain of wonder and grief, of love and loss, endlessly intertwined, endlessly resounding through the world. And if we listen, we can even hear it now.